Hi, and welcome to Filmmakers Compass Podcast, a show where we talk about movies and, well, more movies. I'm D-Man, joined by CP. CP, how are you doing today?
Dude, I'm doing pretty well. How are you?
Well, you know what? Uh, I just had some Del Taco, and we'll leave it at that. Uh, we don't need to fill in the viewers, but our listeners, but I'm sure you guys know what I'm getting at. And it was delicious, and I paid for it. So now I'm ready to talk movies and just totally move on from dinner. So I'm excited that we're actually podcasting, and hopefully I can put all of that behind me. So anyway, CP, let's go ahead and jump into our shout outs tonight. So first up, I want to say that the Temecula Valley Film Festival reached out to us and DM'd us and actually let us know that they're looking for volunteers. So anybody, if you're interested, Temecula Valley Film Festival, boom, connected.
Boom,
So
connected.
yeah, thank you
Does this
guys.
does this mean we're officially influencers now?
Yeah,
I think so.
call us influencers. So next up is Ivor, and he said top three in no order, referring to our list last week of top three baseball movies. He said Major League, Bad News Bears, the original, and Bull Dotham. So, or sorry, that's what he wrote, but Bull
Uh,
Durham.
what? I was like,
No,
I've seen a lot
seriously,
of baseball movies and I've
seriously, I'm
never
reading my
seen
notes.
that one.
I just copy pasted it, and I'm like Ron Burgundy right now, just reading off the teleprompter.
Scotch, scotch, scotch. I like
Yeah,
scotch.
Ivor, if you think that I'm lying right now, go read your message to us. That's what's there. I copy pasted it, and I literally read it as written. So, Bull Durham. Honorable mentions. He said Moneyball, but not enough baseball playing. The Natural, For the Love of the Game, great one. Pride of the Yankees. That speech makes me well up every time. Which it's also probably, if you were doing a list of top speeches, that might be up there. The Long Traveling All Stars and Motor Kings, which I've never seen. A movie with young Billy D. Williams, Richard Pryor, Stan Shaw, and James Earl Jones, all before Star Wars. Come on.
What?
So that
I've
is
never
one.
seen that, but I'm sold on it.
Yeah, like that's one that I appreciate the recommendation because now I'm like, I might have to go just check that out. That sounds awesome.
I'm kind of disappointed that we actually didn't bring up the natural of Pride of the Yankees
Yeah,
last episode. I mean, especially Pride of the Yankees, dude.
that
That's one of my
speech.
favorite sports movies of all time.
Yeah,
Lou
classic
Gehrig is my favorite baseball player. I'm like, I should have thought of that, man.
for sure. Eight Men Out, Everybody Wants Some, Ken Burns, Baseball, and 61. So that completes his sort of
Wow,
honorable mentions, which was really just a list of many
like
baseball
all the
movies.
baseball movies that he's ever seen.
Well, and the
I'm
ones that I
on you,
guess we
Ivor.
didn't get to other than Moneyball. So
Yeah, pretty much.
thank you, Ivor. Appreciate that. And we always appreciate when you guys keep the conversations going. But clearly, Ivor, thank you. We left a lot out. So there's that. Alex, shout out to Alex who got a chance to go see Beetlejuice in one of those high-end theaters. I think they call them, what are they called out here, CP?
Like Sinopolis, one of
Sinopolis.
those
Yeah, the
ones.
ones where like they literally have waiters. You actually have like a counter. You can eat full meals, like the whole thing. And he kind of shared some photos with me that I thought looked really cool. And obviously, I hope you enjoyed the film. But more than that, when you get to go, do an experience, it's like going to box seats at like a sporting event, It's like a
Mhm.
different way to experience the same thing, which is pretty cool. So
Mhm.
on that note, this is not an actual shout out on my list, but I did want to acknowledge that my friend Miguel went to that new theater or whatever the what is it, like the Orb experience from Las Vegas that they have a
Oh,
new,
the Sphere in Las Vegas.
yeah, the Sphere in Las Vegas. Well, he got to go watch the USC LSU game at that new Sphere experience here in Los Angeles, which essentially, if you
The one
haven't
in
seen it,
Burbank.
I think so. And if you haven't seen what it is, instead of being like this whole sphere or this whole orb, it's a screen that wraps all the way around the theater. So it almost looks like like stadium seating, like you're sitting in a
Mhm.
box experience. And then it's a single shot. So the way you're viewing it almost looks like you're looking out of like a box. So it feels like you're kind of there.
So actually, awesome side story for our listening audience. So one of the early guests we had on the show, Gregory Vieser, producer, actually works for the Sphere,
That's awesome.
designing the like next gen content that they're doing in Las Vegas, and they test it all at the Burbank Sphere. So yeah, dude, it's pretty sweet.
That's awesome. I mean, it's just so cool to me, like when you think about the different ways that you can experience things. Like to me, something that like that seems like a perfect extension into how you would probably want to present content in like VR. You know,
Hmm.
we've talked before on this podcast about like the Apple Vision Pro, Quest headsets. You know, they're still in their infancy, but the idea that it's like you can replicate this sort of environment. And in this case, it's really cool because it actually feels like you're in a box. You have servers, you
Yeah.
get to interact with everybody around you. That's pretty neat. Like I could
Hmm.
imagine a UFC fight, even specific movies or certain experiences would be pretty cool.
Yep.
Like, no offense, I'd love to see the Death Star trench run from Star Wars A New Hope. Or
Wow.
for that matter, I'd go watch an entire 24-hour marathon there.
Surprise, D-Man,
Yeah.
surprise.
So we actually have another shout out going to Ivor, who clarified something that he had brought up previously about the TVA for Deadpool and Wolverine. And he said the TVA, I came across a reading, which TVA, Time Variance Authority, for anybody that doesn't know, and they're the ones that are controlling the multiple timelines and essentially maybe the multiverse, we don't know, in Marvel's MCU. I came across a reading that suggests that the TVA was constructed to only be in the He Who Remains universe. That way, he who remains could use the TVA to control outcomes to his benefit as well as hide from other Kangs, which I think that is a great explanation,
Hmm.
honestly.
That's interesting and
Yeah,
makes
that
sense.
if we were gonna say is this settled or not, I'm gonna go ahead and pass a verdict. This is settled, CP. I'm going with that definition of the TVA, and that's how I'm gonna look at it going forward. So,
Noted. Well, it's settled.
uh, let's see, what else do I have here? Boone, shout out to Boone. He jumps in and he says, I'm not sure what to do here, referring to the Star Wars Skeleton Crew trailer. Now, CP, I don't know if you've seen this trailer. Have you?
Yes.
What did you think of it?
I mean, it looks awesome. It's gonna suck because it's Disney Star Wars, but it looks awesome.
I mean, it's very interesting. They have like suburbia in Star Wars. It has a very sort of Stranger Things meets Goonies vibe. Like, I kind of like what they're doing, and I'm very appreciative of like trying new things. So, you know, I've always sort of said that like I'm not a huge fan of like always just rehashing like original trilogy or it's a prequel trilogy show. Like, what about
Yeah.
something different? Can you do anything different in Star Wars? So
Yeah.
I'm actually kind of looking forward to it. Will it be good? That's a coin flip. I have no freaking clue. And Disney's track record is not giving me utter confidence that it will
Yeah.
be, but maybe something new is exactly what's needed. So
Sometimes, sometimes that's exactly what's needed.
oh, and then CP. Speaking of Star Wars,
I
our
know.
final
I know.
shout out is really an RIP to the great James Earl Jones. It's terrible, tragic news to hear of his passing at 93, but thankfully he lived, by a public account, a very great life. And I'm hoping that at 93, he got to accomplish all that he set out to do. And he definitely left a lasting legacy. I mean, we were talking about him and Sandlot last week on this podcast. So,
Yep.
I mean, he was literally a part of our show a week ago. And, obviously a big nod to Darth Vader and the impact that that will have. It is actually interesting. I read that he did sign off on using his voice likeness for Darth Vader for future projects. So James Earl Jones' voice as Darth Vader will live on, which is pretty cool.
Yep.
And they've actually put it to use already, I believe, in the series Obi-Wan, which I thought it sounded great. So I'm looking forward to any other instances of Vader, whether it's in video games, Disney Plus TV shows, or if he ever makes another big screen appearance, which who knows?
Yeah.
Never know. Can't rule it out.
Definitely a bummer, man. He's just part of so many things that I love.
I know. I mean, obviously, we didn't even bring up the Lion King, but him as Mufasa
Mhm.
was, I won't say equally as iconic as Darth Vader, but definitely for 90s kids, he
Yep.
left a big impact for
Yep.
sure. So, and
Yeah.
that's not even to note his other contributions to all his other roles across TV, film, and stage acting. So
Yeah. No, it's incredible.
he had quite a career. So RIP James Earl Jones.
Definitely will be missed.
Well, CP, that does it for our shout outs. I'm gonna throw it over to you. Let's do our box office breakdown.
All right, let's jump into it. Box office breakdown. So, for this past weekend. Oh, give me a sec. All right. I'm assuming that everybody knows what movie dominated the box office this past weekend. It was Beetlejuice Beetlejuice, but don't say
It's
his name a third time.
showtime. Unless they make a third movie.
Yeah, right. Made over $100 million in the opening weekend. And
Holy cow.
obviously, number one movie. I think everyone kind of expected it. But the number two movie is Deadpool and Wolverine, which is
Kicking
still going
ass.
strong. Yeah. Wow. Really been hanging on there, and it will probably be for a few more weeks. And the number three spot is the Reagan movie, which it's now in its second week. Number four, Alien Romulus, which still hasn't gone away. And number five is the fifth movie in the box office from last weekend, and that is It Ends With Us. So, really not substantial changes.
If I
With
had to guess, though, $100 million for Beetlejuice Beetlejuice is really good. Like, my guess would be that it did not cost an arm and a leg to get that movie made and in theaters. And my bet would be that a majority of the budget went to the cast. If that movie, it
Mhm.
literally stands to be like it only exists if we can get these people to come back.
Yeah,
If they
no,
if they don't, we don't make it.
I agree. I agree.
So
So,
hey, to the degree that everybody got paid and had a good time, it sounds like Beetlejuice is going to be a winner. So at the box office.
yep. So, and then when we look at the international numbers, things really haven't changed. It does not seem like Beetlejuice is as successful worldwide as it is domestically, but I also think that kind of makes sense, right?
Yeah, we mentioned that, either last week or the week before when we talked about Deadpool and Wolverine about how some movies translate really well to the international box office. But for some movies that, right, like Beetlejuice that has a sort of cult following and, a longtime fan base here in America, that may not,
Yeah.
translate even despite how long the movie has been around and the character, has been represented in our pop culture, the rest of the world just may not even care about that or find the movie amusing at all. It's just not their style.
Right? Exactly. So, we will see what happens, to the rest of the world. I mean, as of now, I think the total gross is about 150 million, with only, as I said, about 36 of the $36 million coming from the international box office.
Where
So,
does Beetlejuice rank internationally?
as of now,
Yeah,
in terms of,
this weekend.
I mean, it's been the number one in most foreign markets, right?
Oh,
When we look
okay.
at the European markets, when we look at Brazil, when we look at, South Korea, the Middle East, Mexico. But it just, I mean, again, when you look at the numbers, it really hasn't
Taken off.
taken off in the same way that, Deadpool Wolverine did,
Even,
Godzilla Kong, and
yeah,
stuff like
Godzilla,
that,
Kong.
right?
Yeah. Okay.
So that is it on the box office.
All right. Well, let's go ahead and obviously jump in on our movie this week, which we're talking about Beetlejuice.
What? Who knew? I never would have guessed that, D man.
Yeah, so we both actually had the opportunity to go see the movie in theaters this weekend, as well as catch up on an old classic in just the original
Yeah,
Beetlejuice.
definitely.
So one of the things is, looking at these movies, um, the first thing I really want to get into is sort of like, why does Beetlejuice have such a cult status? Like, why do you think this movie has endured for over 30 years?
Uh, D-man, I'm not actually the person who you should be having this discussion with because I'm actually blown away that Beetlejuice has managed to have the cultural impact that it has had.
So you're dancing around the fact that you hate it.
No, because on this podcast we come right now and say stuff. I absolutely hate Beetlejuice. I
Are
cannot
you
stand it.
kidding
I
me?
did not know why they needed to make a sequel to it. Yeah, I don't get it. I don't get it.
All right. So first of
So
all,
you
when I
tell
look,
me why it has such mass appeal.
okay, so obviously, I think if we're just talking mass appeal, I think Tim Burton has his sort of very specific style that he brings to the movies he makes, and he has sort of a cult following of his own for his multiple movies over the years. I think too, the movie is just far enough out there. It's wacky enough that like it builds that sort of, you almost get that community around it where people are like, oh, everybody doesn't like it. That's why I like it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense, but
There's so many, like, okay, a perfect example of what I'm talking about, and Ivor can probably back me up on this, but there's a contingent of fans that love Disney Star Wars, right? They just
no,
love it.
they don't exist.
Yes, they do.
That's not a real thing. That's not
They
a real thing,
love it,
D-man.
but I think they love it because everyone hates it. You know what I mean? And I'm not saying people came around to it was like Beetlejuice itself was a hated film in its time, but it's one of those things where I think like parents, like certain demographics probably just didn't care for the movie. They're like, I don't get it, no. And then you have this, youth, this group of fans that are like, you know what? I probably love it because other people don't like it. And I don't know, I think that's a huge appeal. And by now, because it has such cult status, it's like, kind of cool to be the nerd these days. So now everybody can join in and like it. And then you get this sequel. And I think that's how that happens.
Okay. I mean, fair enough.
Third reason,
Yeah.
and which I don't know, I put up five fingers. Uh
Yeah. I
third
wasn't gonna
reason.
call you on that one.
Yeah, third reason. We're gonna go American. We're not gonna do it like how do they do it in Inglorious Bastards?
Hmm.
Yeah. Sorry for for anybody that's listening and not watching. Yeah. You know exactly what I'm talking about. The third reason is I think the movie plays well around the Halloween season, and Beetlejuice himself is a very popular Halloween costume. And so that character endures through the holiday season every year for that cult following, but also in an effort to raise awareness and create new fans that didn't know Beetlejuice existed.
I mean, I can see that, right? I mean, it's not specifically a Halloween movie, but it does involve ghosts in a haunted house, and that's
Yep.
kind of on brand for Halloween, so I can see that.
Fourth reason, and that was
Uh-oh.
four fingers, the cartoon and nostalgia.
Okay.
So I think there's a large group of people that maybe never even saw the movie, but grew up with the cartoon. And as for the character, I think we are in a time where we're getting a ton of these older, movies from the 80s that are getting all of these new sequels, and it's like a nostalgia run. And so if you're asking me, how did we get a Beetlejuice sequel? I think I just knocked it out of the park.
I mean, I'm not going to argue with you. You've made some very convincing points. As I said, for me, Beetlejuice never spoke to me. I remember seeing it and being like, okay, I don't get it. I did definitely see the cartoon before I ever actually saw the movie, but
There you go. See?
even then, watching the movie, I was like, man, it wasn't what I was expecting it to be.
All right. Well, my first reason, which is Tim Burton, his distinct style, and he has a fan base that, kind of sticks with him in across his filmography. What do you think creates Tim Burton's distinct style?
Well, I think, and Tim Burton is another. It's really weird in the sense that Tim Burton is a director, like a true auteur who I believe attracts attention in the same way that like Nolan does, or Tarantino, or Guy Ritchie, or Spielberg, or Scorsese. Like there are people who go see Tim Burton movies because Tim Burton is the creative mind behind them. Which again, Tim Burton is not my style. I find it very strange that he has such a magnetic draw for so many people, but I think a lot of it comes from the themes that he explores, right? All of his movies are dealing with characters that are grappling with an element of loneliness in their life.
Yeah.
They're outsiders who feel like outsiders. And there's a lot of macabre kind of elements
Oh,
to it,
100%.
right? Like
Almost anything. Nightmare
everything
Before
he
Christmas,
does, he pulls that aspect in.
Sleepy Hollow. I don't know if he directed it, but he was involved in it.
Oh, he
Uh,
directed Sleepy Hollow. I
yeah,
mean, the only
Sleepy
one that
Hollow.
really doesn't have macabre elements to it in my mind is Planet of the Apes, and probably that movie bombed in the box office because everyone walked out of it and was like, "This does not feel like a Tim Burton movie."
Well, like Batman Returns doesn't have any macabre elements.
Oh yeah, not at all. None.
The penguin throwing a baby in a bassinet into a river, send him off down a, I don't want my baby, bye, into the sewer.
Right? Selena Kyle falling out a window.
And living, which is wild. I mean, I guess she had 9 lives, but that was crazy. But yeah, I mean, even you look at Tim Burton's Gotham City and Batman, which is, very gothic, very macabre. There's a lot of weird things going on there. Um, I don't know. He has a ton of movies where that's the case. I mean, he's sort of known for it. What was the other one? Corpse Bride. Come
Frank
on.
and Weenie. Yeah.
Yeah. Like they all sort of fit that
Well,
mold.
but I think you also nailed it too. He also has a very distinct visual style, right? He draws in, pulls in a lot of gothic in terms of the architecture, in terms of the visual style, which I think a lot of, right, that is something very original about the way he tells stories with such a gothic element, not just in terms of the writing and the tone of the stories, but the visual look of the films as well.
And I think that there's a truth to that style. It's the reason why we celebrate Halloween every year. It's
Mm-hmm.
that imagery does speak to people if, only once, one season out of the year. But for a lot of people, it speaks to them year round, right?
Yep.
Being gothic isn't something that people do around Halloween. Like that's part of their identity. And so I think his style is unique, especially today. In fact, especially right, Beetlejuice,
Yeah.
especially today, because I feel like as the studios have sort of gobbled each other up, you sort of get this more streamlined version of how movies get made in general. You think about Deadpool and Wolverine, but you go back to original Deadpool. If that wasn't owned by 20th Century Fox, do you think Disney's ever making that movie?
No, not
No.
anyway.
They only
You're right.
allowed it because they purchased Fox and they knew it was going to be a gold mine. So they're like, go for it. But do you think they greenlight that version of Deadpool back then? There's no way. So I think his style does stand out, especially today in a sea of very similar looking visual styles, especially for like big blockbuster style movies. Streaming a little bit different. You get more experimental things and you get to see different stuff. But blockbusters, they play it fairly safe, I feel like.
I would agree.
So, and then I also think sort of the lonely character. You're right about that as well. Batman loner. Um Not Beetlejuice, but
But
oh,
Lydia is,
Lydia, yeah.
right?
I was gonna say Delia, but that's her mom or her stepmom. But yeah, Lydia, like, and then you just go through and you have like, through his filmography, and you just see this sort of again and again and again.
Coraline, Edward Scissorhands, all these characters are outsiders who are living outside of society and grappling with the fact that they know they're outsiders, right? And how do they
And
find people who see them for who
but
they
when
really are?
you look at him as an auteur, you can see too where that would attract, I think, everybody at some time. That's a universal thing. Maybe I'm not an outsider and I'm not lonely, 98% of the time, but we all feel that way some of the time.
Yeah.
So I think to that end, it's another reason why his films have also had mass appeal, and he's been, probably one of the more successful directors over yours and my lifetime, the last
Definitely.
37, 40 years. So,
Definitely.
um, I know when we were doing our pre-production meeting, you had also talked about his frequent collaborators, particularly I think he's worked with Johnny Depp, now,
Michael Keaton,
yeah, Michael Keaton and some of the different people. Well, those are
Catherine
big name
O'Hara. Yeah.
actors as
Yeah.
well. So his movies, because he also collaborates with these, huge box office draws that are willing to come and participate in some of these films, I think helps their mass mainstream appeal as well.
Well, and again, and I think we've seen other auteurs do that really well. Scorsese has the same, Pesci,
De
De
Niro.
Niro, DiCaprio, who appear throughout his movies. Spielberg works with Tom Hanks frequently. And I think that good directors who land on a style and can find actors that understand that director and know how to work with them and appreciate their vision, they like to work together. And I think as an audience, okay, I know what I'm getting from a director perspective, but I'm getting dependable actors who can really embody this vision and bring it to life. And so I think that there's a reason why we see this pairing frequently between good actors and good directors who just get, gel and get one another.
I mean, on that note, then, when we talk about, successful mainstream filmmakers, you know, Spielberg, Nolan, Scorsese, Guy Ritchie, Tarantino. I mean, where do you think Tim Burton fits on that list? I mean, obviously, I know you're
I
probably,
mean, I wouldn't put him on that list at all. You know
but
that.
I mean, you can acknowledge though that like he has a following that allows him to be mentioned along those other greats.
Absolutely.
I mean, would you put him? I mean, for me, I'm probably, putting him towards the bottom of that list.
I probably would too, just because I think it again, when we consider the other directors that he's up against who have really cultivated that kind of status as people go to the theaters to see their movies because they have made it. I
Yeah.
just think that I don't know that Tim Burton's films have quite the bandwidth that, Scorsese or Spielberg or Nolan do.
Interesting. But I mean, that is cool that, there's only so many people that you can put on a list like that before you're like, it's not a list, you're just naming people.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, that's pretty neat because, yeah, I mean, like I said, he's had movies from right around the time I was born to the 90s to the 2000s to today. I just, went and saw a
Just
Tim
keeps
Burton
making
film
movies. Yeah.
this weekend. So the guy has,
Yep.
really made, a success out of that style of filmmaking. So one of the things that we never got though, so we sort of went through a little bit of his filmography here,
I know.
is at one point there was both a potential Batman 3 as well as a Superman film
Yeah.
that were on the table in the 90s, and neither one came to pass. And I was wondering if you could maybe elaborate on that a little bit.
Well, so let's talk about Batman first. What we ended up getting was Joel Schumacher's Batman Forever. And
Ooh,
originally, this was supposed to be Tim Burton's third Batman movie. Michael
completing the
Keaton was
trilogy.
going to be back as Batman. And with some issues with the studio, part of it was Warner Brothers was not happy about the darker tone of Batman Returns. It underperformed in the theater in Warner Brothers' eyes,
I was
so
gonna
they
say
wanted to move away from Burton.
underperformed, like compared to the first one, because that is not that wild.
Yeah, right.
I mean, I get it. I bet they were looking at it more as like a franchise and like, oh, I bet we could like sell action figures and all this. And then you go see Batman Returns and you're like, oh, I don't know if I'm buying those action figures for my kids. But at the same time, like, I don't know what they were expecting considering the style of the first one. Like maybe Penguin not biting someone's nose or something like
And
if
maybe
you take that
Catwoman not
out,
being so hypersexual.
that was awesome.
Well, I'm saying, right? They're billing this as like a take your kids movie, so that
Oh
was
yeah,
probably one of the
sorry.
flags that they had.
I mean, I thought it was awesome back then.
But the point is, you know, after the success of the first one, I think they really said, "Hey, Burton, do what you want to do," and he probably brought it a little bit more into the corner that he wanted to make a movie than the more mainstream viable, original Batman.
Who are the villains? They're a dominatrix and a freak.
So that's what happened. And then once Tim Burton left the project, Michael Keaton backed out, and then we ended up with Batman Forever as well. We've got Batman Forever.
It's boiling acid.
But the more exciting movie is the never realized Superman film, Superman Lives. Now, D-Man, have you really followed this story at all?
So I've read a little bit about it, and then I saw a video on YouTube, but that is about it. So no,
So
you're gonna
John,
need to fill us in here.
so John Peters, who was one of the producers on the original Batman with Tim Burton, acquired the rights to Superman.
Okay.
This is in the age before computers. He got a tip that someone said it was going to come up, so he immediately, locked on the rights. And by the time that Warner Brothers realized that their rights were
Yep.
expiring, he'd already purchased them.
Makes perfect sense. I mean, if you want CP, keep your eyes peeled for the rights to Superman today.
Maybe I'll get lucky.
Maybe we'll get it.
So
Produced by Filmmakers Compass Podcast.
yeah, right. He calls up Tim Burton and says, "Hey, I got Superman and I want to see your version." Now, what's really crazy about this movie that was never made was there was just a lot of really interesting elements. For one, Kevin Smith was brought in and actually wrote the first draft
So
of
there's a script out there.
Superman movie. Oh yeah, and it's awesome. It's awesome. John Peters threw in all these weird requirements for what it had to be, but it was going to be a movie based on the death of Superman, where Superman, quote unquote, dies and returns. He
Obviously.
fights Brainiac.
Superman
fights
lives.
Luthor. What more do we want?
Okay, Brainiac would have been awesome.
Now, what's really interesting about the film that was not yet made was two things. For one, Tim Burton actually came in and seemed to have a really interesting take on the character of Superman, right? Tim Burton has always said he wants to tell stories about loners. He himself is quoted as saying, "Hey, I always felt like an alien." So it's kind of an interesting approach him taking to the story of Superman, this alien on another planet.
Yeah.
And he really kind of dove into what would it be like for Kal-El to leave Earth or leave Krypton and come to Earth and grow up and be different and be an outsider and know that he's different. But the other thing that he really honed in on is the fact that he said he saw this as the yin to the yang that he made with Batman 89.
So these were gonna sort of speak to each other.
Yeah, and his reasoning was, and in the initial Kevin Smith draft, this was going to be the first major superhero crossover. Batman actually has a speaking role, where he talks to the world following the deaths of Superman. So even cooler, we could have gotten some Michael Keaton Batman.
Yeah, I was gonna say, are we talking like Michael Keaton?
Yeah, I mean, of course.
Potentially. Okay.
Yeah. So
shared universes back in the 90s.
Yeah, his whole idea was Batman is the story of a superhero happening at night. Superman is in the daylight. And he admitted himself, kind of in talking with his creative team and developing the concept art and everything, he seemed really excited about the idea of telling this story in the light, which is kind of the opposite of his characters who live in the dark and in the shadows. And
right. I was going to say, sort of going against that distinct style we were describing earlier.
Yeah. So it was very interesting. And he really kind of approached it with a unique perspective. Now, the other thing, and this is what's generated the most controversy on the internet about Superman Lives, the choice to play Superman was none other than Nicolas Cage.
Now that I knew, because that's legendary, and we even got a hint of it in the Flash movie.
The Flash. Now, I personally think that this would have been amazing, because when you see interviews of Nicolas Cage talk, first of all, what we don't realize is Nicolas Cage is a huge Superman fan. He named his son Kal-El after, well, the one and only Kal-El.
But like for real, like on his birth certificate?
Yeah, like his name is Kal-El Cage Coppola.
That's insane.
That's awesome.
All right. I was thinking you meant like, his name's like Dustin Kal-El Garbasiak.
No. His first name is Kal-El.
Wow. Okay.
And Nicolas Cage, in talking about it, really seemed to have an understanding of wanting to take Superman in a slightly different position than we've seen kind of through the more classic approaches at Superman. And what I find
Hmm.
interesting about this is, you know me, you know I'm super critical of anyone's take on Superman.
Yeah.
He's my favorite superhero, but I'm really curious to see what the two of them would have done because they seem to have a very interesting perspective on telling the Superman story. On one hand, it seems like despite the fact that when we look at the concept art, what we hear about the story, it seems like they're totally throwing everything out the window and starting all over. At the same time, in a weird way, they are incredibly grounded in who the character of Superman is and what motivates him.
Okay. I mean, now I'd like to go, down that rabbit hole on the internet and maybe go find the script, or at the very least, I'm sure there's some YouTube videos out there that can sort of break this down, sort of an in-depth analysis on what could have been.
Mm-hmm.
That'd be pretty neat to go check out. If I find any videos, we'll share them on our social media account. That'd be pretty dope.
You should, dude. It's fun.
Well, yeah, I like that because obviously I think Superman as a franchise has been plagued by very similar issues time and again that have really held it back from even superseding, Batman in its own DC universe, where
Yeah,
I think,
right.
right, Batman is probably the more popular superhero in mainstream culture. So, much less competing against Marvel at this point, which,
Mm-hmm.
has risen so far and so fast, whether you go back to the X-Men and Spider-Man in the early 2000s or the MCU today. I mean, I feel like we've talked about on this podcast, eventually we're like, somebody's going to do a Superman movie right.
Mm-hmm.
And it's going to be epic as hell. And it's going to make Superman maybe the most popular superhero again. But you have to wonder, uh, did they miss it here?
Mm-hmm.
Superman Lives. May they have had an incredible story and passed on it, probably going safe and trying to return to that like Christopher Reeve, you know, style of Superman with Superman Returns, which is coincidentally not that far off from Superman Lives.
Well, and right, and the unfortunately the story of Superman Lives has become such a bastardization with the Nick Cage. There's always this photo of Nick Cage with the long hair wearing the Superman suit. But what I think people don't know is in
Because
the
didn't they
19
they didn't they do like test images of him?
well, it was they were testing him in terms of what he was going to look like. That wasn't finalized. But the Superman comic book character in the 1990s actually had long shoulder length hair.
What?
So what? Why? By today's standards, after seeing our chiseled Henry Cavill and things like that, and Brandon Roth, this was actually in line with the comic book telling of Superman in the mid 90s.
Okay. Well, I mean, hey, I'm down for Tim Burton Superman because I'll tell you what, I love Tim Burton Batman. And I don't know, I can't imagine that he would go into it and half-ass it. I mean, he's definitely going to bring it.
Yeah.
So, and hey, say what you will about Nick Cage, and I'm guessing that most criticism being leveled at him as Superman is that it'll look like Nick Cage as Superman. But can we all acknowledge that Nick Cage's range is fucking incredible? Like, there's also a Nick Cage video on YouTube, which maybe we'll share that as well, where they sort of just go through him like going crazy in all his movies.
Yep.
And I mean, I don't know. As far as Nick Cage's range and whether or not he could deliver, as Superman, I believe in him.
Oh, he's an incredible. I mean, he's an Academy Award winning actor. I think people forget that sometimes, right?
Yeah, and especially back then, I mean, Nick Cage was literally a huge draw. And I
Mm-hmm.
think even later, I mean, this is probably being developed in the early 90s, right after Superman, or sorry, Batman Returns, and which ironically we got Superman Returns, but
Yeah.
whatever. He goes on to do like Con Air and Gone in 60 Seconds. And I mean, he ended
Yep.
up being by the end of the 90s, The Rock and all these movies. Like
Yeah.
he was one of the biggest stars of probably
Face Off.
the second half of the 90s. So I mean, it's crazy to think that he could have mixed a Superman movie in there too.
Yeah,
If he
right.
did, he probably would have been the biggest star of the 90s.
Oh, I totally agree.
So that, I don't know, that would have been crazy. So on that note though, CP, let's return to Beetlejuice here. And it is Halloween. So one of the things that we will share oh, it's not Halloween, but it's fall, and we're approaching Halloween season. And one of the things we will share on our social media, if you're interested in checking it out, is a few years ago, Steph and I actually went as Beetlejuice for Halloween. So we'll definitely share that photo. And I wanted to get your opinion on the new movie sort of taking place at Halloween. I mean, it feels like maybe a missed opportunity in the original one to just establish Beetlejuice as an outright Halloween film, but it sort of became that anyway, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like,
Definitely.
just like you said, I mean, we were talking about, macabre things and ghosts and haunted houses and the afterlife and all this. So it sort of fit right in with that. And I think it sort of became a Halloween classic. But more than that, like, Beetlejuice is a staple of Halloween costumes.
Yeah, definitely true.
I don't know. Did you ever see my costume?
I did. I
It's actually
did.
pretty dope. It
We're gonna have to
looks,
repost it.
yeah, it looks pretty sick, honestly. I have this. I should have worn the suit for this episode.
Yeah, you should have
Oh
missed
my
opportunity, D
God.
man.
Dude, I have it. It's right in my closet. Oh, next time though, dude. Next time.
That could have
I
been
don't know.
it.
You always come prepared. You always have the shirt or the hat or the something. And this time was my time to shine, and I totally dropped the ball.
I, I know. I'm a little disappointed in you, man.
I
I'm a
like
little
can't even
disappointed.
I can't even believe this because I was talking to you about my Halloween costume when we did pre-production.
Yeah,
How did this not cross my mind before we hit record is
I don't know.
beyond me.
I
But
mean, how did you not go see Beetlejuice dressed as Beetlejuice when you have a
I
costume?
have no idea what is going on in my
And I
head.
know you love to wear costumes to the
I
movies.
know I literally have the Beetlejuice suit. This is so unacceptable on my half. You know, I feel like I should be punished on this show. So, listeners, if you think I should do a punishment on air,
Oh, I'm gonna text Weinzettel. He's probably got some good
yeah, let
ideas.
me know what you think I should do because I have dropped the ball huge. I went to opening weekend Beetlejuice and did not dress up as Beetlejuice despite having the costume, and then forgot to wear it for our very own podcast about movies where we're talking about Beetlejuice. This is unacceptable.
Wow. I'm kind of disappointed in you. And when I say kind of, I mean I'm really disappointed in you.
All right. I am throwing off my game. So CP, I'm going to throw it over to you to take us into some facts about Beetlejuice.
So we know the first one has a cult status, but I did a little digging and these were some cool facts that I came across. So you may have heard these, audience. You may have heard these, D Man. I don't know. We'll see what you think. So, first fact is this: did you know that the very first DVD sent out via mail by fledgling Netflix all the way back in 1998 was actually a DVD of the original Beetlejuice movie?
That is amazing.
I know. What are the chances? Like, I'm not even like a Beetlejuice fan, but like that makes me respect the movie more just for that like role in the history of in film history, right?
Yeah, especially, I mean, given, the success of Netflix by this point, right? It's definitely something that it's like the first DVD of all the movies you could pick to send out. Of all the movies. And they had to know that like I mean, obviously they marked it down somewhere
Mm-hmm.
and they picked Beetlejuice. I mean, they could have picked any order and sent that movie first, but they picked Beetlejuice.
Yeah, right. So, second fun fact: Michael Keaton actually turned down the role of Beetlejuice twice before finally accepting, and that's because he said when he just read the script, he just didn't get it.
Hmm. Interesting.
So
You
apparently,
know,
Michael Keaton and I are on the same brainwave here.
I don't get it either. No, I'm just kidding.
um, Much like the character Hannibal Lecter in Silence of the Lambs, Beetlejuice is actually only in the film for about 18 minutes total. I mean, he
That
doesn't
is
appear until 45 minutes into the movie.
very interesting considering like obviously he's the name of the film and it is interesting as well because he also never quite comes across as the main character.
Mm-hmm. That's
Uh,
true.
he he is a major character, but he never takes center stage really away from, sort of the people who were following in the haunted house.
Yeah.
So I kind of, yeah, I could get that. I get
So
it.
this is a cool one. There is actually a Jack Skeleton prototype in the movie Beetlejuice.
No.
when he is summoned and the juice gets loose, and he appears with the carnival ride on his head, and he comes out and he
Yeah.
goes, "Attention, Kmart shoppers." Jack Skeleton is actually on the very top of that.
Oh, I'm gonna go check that out after we, stop recording because I gotta see it. And not only that, when you say attention Kmart shoppers, was that for their like red light sales?
Yeah, I think so. I don't
Back in
know.
the day,
Kmart's not
like
even a
the
thing anymore, is
yeah,
it?
the shoe department would have like a red light
Yeah.
sale, and you like they attention Kmart shoppers, and then you could like go run to the shoe department and get like a great deal.
Oh my gosh. Alec Baldwin expected Beetlejuice to be a total career killer. Obviously, it did not. He's a very successful actor who is in fact a killer. So, you know,
That's weird
over to
because
him.
I don't get that. I mean, obviously, I think the movie is definitely a visual treat, so like it probably without having seen it and only reading a script, I could see where you'd be like, "Oh crap." But at the same time, like I also even if you read the script, I can't imagine that this movie would kill a career. Like it's not a drama where it's going to come across so horribly as something like Geely, where you're like, wow, this
Yeah.
is not good. I mean, it's so zany and wacky that I think it would almost always be explained away as like an oddball role or like, you just didn't get it. Kind of
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
I mean, Michael Keaton himself.
Um, Michael Keaton obviously has a big history in comedy movies, Gun Ho, Mr. Mom. He ended up ad-libbing most of his Beetlejuice lines in the movie.
Oh, that's interesting. That's actually really hard to do, and something that you have to have a good collaborator and a director, or even with screenwriters if they're a part of the actual production process, because a lot of times directors and stuff, they might give you a couple takes, but they're going to stick to the script.
Yeah. So the first draft of the film is significantly darker than the comedic version that we've seen in the final version of the screenplay. In the sense that like Lydia ends up dying, the house burns down, she ends up dying and becomes a ghost with the Matlocks at the end.
The
When the
Maitlands.
Yeah, that's it. Sorry. When the Maitlands, when they drive off the bridge at the beginning of the movie, apparently it's a
Yeah.
much more gory death, and they end up like missing body parts and things.
Huh.
Beetlejuice actually kills Lydia's sister, who is not in the movie, but there was a version where she was written in. And he actually like attacked her.
Wow.
So it
That's
was
actually
much darker, like more of a horror movie than a kind of the horror comedy that we've come to know it as.
I mean, I kind of like it more as the comedy. I think that's part of the charm of what makes it work. I don't know that Lydia dying would have, really ruined the whole tone. It might have actually fit if they did it right, because the way they do it with the Maitlands, like they literally just show up back at their house. They don't even know they're dead. So it's
Well,
not like,
I think the concern from Warner Brothers' perspective more was the fact that you have a screenplay where a teen girl admits that she wants to be dead, and
I
then
mean,
she
that's
ends up
fair.
dying in a fire, and
But
that's
then they,
probably sending out weird messages to confuse
but they
teenagers.
were fine with like Beetlejuice wanting to marry her.
Yeah, no, that's not a
That's
problem.
that's cool. Whatever.
um, Tim Burton intentionally wanted the effects to look bad. Part of it was he had a limited budget, so he really tried to mimic it after the B level horror movies that he grew up watching.
Love it. I think
And
that actually is part of the charm of the
that
movie.
did
I think
make
it's
the
a great
style what
choice.
it is. And finally, and I find this hilarious, Tim Burton himself did not get the movie when he first read the script.
Wait, explain that.
He read the screenplay. Warner Brother was like, "Do you want to direct this?" He's like, "I don't really get it." I guess he was kind of confused going into production. And he says that only after he met Gina Davis, who he was not originally considering to cast,
Yeah.
she met him and was like, "Hey, I totally get this. I love it." And he's like, "Great. If you know what you're doing, then I can make a movie around." And
Really?
his understanding of Beetlejuice, the character in the movie, kind of developed after that, which I just find hilarious because, well, it's his movie, and you'd think he got it pretty well.
That is interesting just because he would strike me as the guy that would read it. Like everybody else is like, I don't get it. And he's like, oh,
Mm-hmm.
I get it.
Yeah, right.
Like he strikes me as the guy that would get it. Michael Keaton was like, I passed twice. Other people are like, I don't know. I would think Tim Burton would be the guy that would be
That's
like,
what I
yeah.
would have thought. I would have thought that he's like, yes, I want to make this movie. I totally get it.
Something else that stood out to me, which I can't confirm this completely, but I saw this on social media as Beetlejuice was releasing. But it is interesting if you watch the movie, when you see the spelling of Beetlejuice, I think like on his tombstone and then again on like his coffin, or on that sign,
Yeah.
it's actually spelled differently within the film. So if you pay attention to it, I think there's like a U in there and only one T, and like it's spelled differently.
Huh. I didn't realize that, but maybe.
Well, apparently they had originally, when they were doing it, they were going to have it spelled that way when you say Beetlejuice. And if you actually remember, Alec Baldwin reads that and pronounces it wrong, Beetle guys,
Oh
or
yeah. Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
And so that's within the movie. Like it's not phonetically Beetlejuice, which it is when how they put it on the poster. And apparently that was studio intervention because they did not think people would know how to pronounce it. And so I think that's actually a great example of studio intervention where despite even within the movie, the actual title of the film Beetlejuice never showing up, uh that intervention on the movie's title was actually well done.
No, I think that was a good move because you don't want a movie that no one can actually pronounce.
So, and then just another side note to that is that when you watch the original Beetlejuice movie, so on the title of like the film poster and the DVD and everywhere you see it, Beetlejuice is one word. But at the very beginning of the movie, it's Beetle and Juice
Mm-hmm.
as two words, which so it's actually like three different ways, which I don't know if that was part of the charm and again, how intentional that was to anything within the actual context of the story. But rumor is that the studio intervened here so that basically anybody that saw the poster could pronounce it. And they also just got Beetlejuice kind of evokes exactly what the imagery of the movie is, honestly.
Yeah.
Creepy, funny, weird. You're like, yeah, Beetlejuice. And then you go see it and you're
Interesting.
like, yep, that
Interesting.
totally works.
Huh. Okay. Okay.
So, okay, CP, we cannot move on to our final discussion here without actually just talking a little Beetlejuice. So, as far as the sequel goes, set the stage for us on your thoughts on the original, and then going into this, what your expectations were and what you thought of it.
Well, as I have said now at least once, and this will be the second or third time this episode, I'm not a big fan of Beetlejuice. I don't get it. I watch it and I'm like, okay, doesn't speak to me. The plights of the characters I don't really relate to, probably because I've never been dead. So for me, I just never a movie that I was like, yes, I can't wait to see the sequel. So I wasn't really sure where they were gonna pick up the story 30 years down the line.
Yeah.
And I did like some of the decisions, right? I think something like that, you have an iconic house. It's great to go back. It's great to revisit some of the familiar aspects of the first film. They're bringing back most of the original cast, which I think was a smart move. I think my thing is watching the movie, it just got very convoluted in the storytelling. I was thinking it would
Okay.
be very focused on some Lydia Beetlejuice relationship, right?
Yeah.
Whatever's going on here, it would involve the two of them. And that's not really what it was. It was a story with a lot of moving parts. What did you think?
I do agree with you about the story elements. They had a lot of plot elements. So Lydia is, obviously 30 years older. She's in a relationship, and this guy is basically sort of using her fame and renown in order to enrich himself. We know this as the audience, but she doesn't recognize it in him. And so he's, basically the plot line is he wants to marry her in order to elevate himself.
Mm-hmm.
But he's doing this in a really, sort of slimy, sneaky way. So, one storyline. Storyline two is that, the dad from the original movie, Charles, has passed away in a freak plane shark surfing accident or whatever.
Yeah.
And it's his funeral. And so Lydia, her daughter, and Charles's wife and her stepmom all return back to the town from the first one and, go back to the house. So they're there to have a funeral. Then you have the daughter who basically her father passed away in a tragic accident and she has a bad relationship because of her mom. So, which is uh what's her name? Jenna Ortega.
Hmm.
Yeah, her character. So she has a bad relationship with her mom, and she ends up venturing off as the loner in this movie and starts a relationship with a boy. And then you have sort of the third and fourth elements, which are what is Beetlejuice up to, just in general. And then the fifth storyline would be some mysterious woman is, reassembled. Danny DeVito makes a cameo,
Yeah.
and she wants to kill Beetlejuice. And so there's literally a lot of things happening all at once. And so they do converge, and I think the movie is a little bit convoluted for it. I feel like the storyline of the woman who reassembles, which spoiler alert, it's Beetlejuice's ex-wife, and she wants to come suck his soul, and because it belongs to her, she's a very stock villain that has no characterization other than like basically, I just want to destroy you. And so she shows up, and I think honestly, she's a misdirect for sort of the real villain of the script,
Hmm. Hmm.
which is actually the love interest for Jenna Ortega's character. And he essentially ends up, surprise, spoilers, he was dead too. And he's going to, basically swap lives with her so he can come back to the real world.
Yeah.
Now, that's a
And
lot.
that's not even including this whole minor storyline with Hollywood celebrity turned
Yeah, Willem
cop
Dafoe.
in Willem Dafoe turned netherworld cop tracing down renegade souls. Like it's just a lot of story, and it's a lot of story.
Yeah, so they got a lot going on. And then when it comes to sort of the other world and Beetlejuice's world, we're sort of left to basically have seen the original movie.
Hmm.
They rarely go into any deep
Mechanics
explanations,
of it, yeah. It's
which
sort of
they
like
do
you
in the
visit,
first movie.
but they're like you visited it once, you know how it works. That's it.
Yeah, so they're kind of like, hey, we're revisiting these same locations and different things, a little nostalgia bait there, but it's also like something that, works in these 30-year-old sequels. But in essence, they're relying on the viewer to really have a more deep like if you had never seen the first one and you watch this one and you're like, oh, I don't know what's going on, they'd be like, go watch the first one,
Yeah, exactly.
and then you'll get it. So they're just really relying on that without really explaining the mechanics of the world. Um, and not that I thought that was to its detriment. I don't think it had enough time. Something had to give. And I think revisiting how this all works was part of what had to get, something had to get cut somewhere.
No, I agree. And but that's my issue with all the storylines. I'm like, if this was the Beetlejuice, you know, 8 episode Netflix series, okay, throw out all these storylines and let's run them down. But we don't have the time to truly explore each of these characters' relationship with with the other people in their storyline, right? Because it's a story about all these characters and their relationships with others, as well as their relationship with death. And that's a
Yeah.
lot to unpack in a 2 hour and 15-minute movie or whatever.
Yeah. So that definitely sort of stands out as one of the things. But if I had, so this is where you and I differ. I definitely think that the film doesn't, it does use the spirit of the original. It's a lot of fun.
Mm-hmm.
I think the effects look great. I mean, honestly, Michael Keaton as Beetlejuice looks exactly the same.
Yeah, right.
I mean, it doesn't even look like he's aged at all. Other than, I mean, he's probably not quite as like animated and quick on his feet because Michael Keaton's like what, 70 now?
Yeah, something like that.
I mean, here he is playing Batman and Beetlejuice again, but like he really knocked it out of the park in both those roles, if I had to be honest.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I thought the movie was really fun. And CP, they actually go out of this way to set the sequel at Halloween this
Yep.
time. They're
That's
sort of
true.
leaning into that now, where obviously, Beetlejuice is sort of a Halloween mainstay. So they're like, why not, you know, uh, have something at the witching hour on Halloween, a wedding, and go through that whole thing. But I like the use of like the stop motion effects. I think it still captures that zany, uh, like kind of crazy vibe that the original had. But yeah, this one just has a lot going on. The other thing is, I also, when you go back to the original, I think part of the charm of the original one for me is its ability to sort of say, like, you know, what happens when you die,
Mhm.
right? It kind of explores, like, okay, these people are stuck. They don't know. They're like, are we in heaven? Are we in hell? Are we in between? I don't know. But basically, they're ghosts haunting this house. So what if you were a ghost haunting a house? And I love the idea of, like, in the original movie, Beetlejuice is literally positioned as a bioexorcist. So it's basically like, what if ghosts are haunting a house and then people move in that they don't want to be there? So what do you do if you're a ghost? You either have to scare these people out of the house, or you can go hire this bioexorcist who comes in and he could take care of it for you.
Mhm.
Like, that's so cool. That's so neat and unique to me. Like, that's just interesting as far as world building, right? You get the manual when you die.
Mhm.
They sort of run down the mechanics of, like, oh hey, like anytime you step outside the boundaries of the house you're haunting, you end up in a desert being attacked by you know,
Sandworms. Apparently, someone
sandworms.
someone read a lot of Dune before they
I
wrote
think
the
so. I mean,
screenplay.
it's like a direct, I mean, in I think both of them, they even show the sand almost like straight out of
Hmm.
Dune, which
Hmm.
was pretty cool. And I mean, obviously they're having fun there with the animation style and what a sandworm can look like, right? In the
Hmm.
afterlife. But it just felt like part of the charm of the original was this sense of, like, what if you were a ghost that was haunting a house and, like, you didn't want the new residents to live there?
Hmm.
Like, that's a cool premise to me.
No, I got you. That is kind of interesting.
So I don't know. I thought that really worked for the original. And again, they're much more going with, I guess, like a little bit more of like a traditional storyline here. Like, mother needs to save daughter, daughter wants independence, and they reconnect. A little bit more like of a genre staple, I guess I'd say. So,
True.
but
True.
CP, I actually liked it. I had a lot of fun. I mean, is it a masterpiece? No. But if you're a fan of the original one, I think there's a lot to like here. And I think if you're a fan of the original one, you will like this one. So it makes sense to me that if you were not a fan of the original, that you wouldn't like this one. I mean, that makes
Sorry.
perfect sense.
Truth hurts, everyone. Truth hurts.
I also thought, like you said, they had a lot of good callbacks to the original, whether it was going to specific locations or they made some fun references, or the use of like Charles being eaten by a shark and go motion. And then like he shows up because they can't get the actor, which FYI, apparently that actor got arrested and
Oh,
like the,
he's a bad man.
yeah, he like did some crazy stuff with, like, I don't know, underage kids, and you get the idea.
Yeah.
Uh,
So you
yeah,
can't put him in a movie.
can't come back. Yeah, he's out. So I don't know. I thought it worked. I had a good time watching it. Also, CP, I wanted to acknowledge that we're in this heat wave in LA. And when I went, the AC was out at the theater I went to.
Oh, brutal, man.
So I was sitting there sweating the whole
There's
time.
nothing worse than that.
And they were like, you can get a refund. And I was like, well, I'm an A-list member. So how about you give me like a free popcorn or something?
You're like, yeah,
Like, I'm
refund
not going to get a refund. Yeah.
doesn't really do it for me.
Yeah. You've wasted my time. No, I stayed anyway. But I mean, it's ironic because during a heat wave, you normally go to the movies to cool off.
No, it's like one of the best places to escape to.
Yeah, that was rough. So, okay, that's our thoughts, I think, on this specific movie. But for our final topic tonight, and we're kind of hinting at that right now, I want to talk a little bit about sequels that have been made 30 years later, because this is like a thing.
Yeah, and it's really wild that it's happened recently.
Yeah, a lot of like 80s, a couple 90s movies, all being remade years later, sort of in the name of nostalgia, and maybe to like make sure that like the idea of, like, if you ever wanted to do a sequel, you should do it now before the actors get too old.
Right? Exactly.
Because the thing
Exactly.
is, and this is what I want to acknowledge, all of these sequels are not rebooting a franchise.
Yep.
They're not saying like, "Hey, we want to remake Beetlejuice or we want to uh start a new Beetlejuice story." They're like, "We want to make a direct sequel to the movie that was made 24 years ago or 34 years ago or
They're
whatever."
also not franchises that have been cranking movies out and they just said, well, it's been 15 years since the last time we made a Jurassic Park movie. Let's go back
Yeah,
to
I
it.
mean, Jurassic
Right?
Park's a perfect example where it's like, hey, most of them haven't been good, but since the original, they've made like 6 or 7 of them, and they've
Yeah.
done it fairly consistently. There's been gaps between some, but nothing like 30 years.
Yeah.
And so, or James Bond or something, it's like, yeah, occasionally when they
Yeah.
switch James Bond actors, there's a gap, but
Yeah.
generally, like they're always
Yeah.
making the next James Bond movie. Where it's like all of these movies. So let's just do a rundown here. Do you have it in front of you?
I got it in front of me.
Read them
Yep.
off.
All right. So the first one, Independence Day Resurgence, which came out in 2016. That's 20 years after the original Independence Day from 1996.
Yep,
Wall Street Money Never Sleeps. Do you remember that one?
I
2010.
do. Gordon Gecko.
23 years after the original Wall Street from 1987.
Yep.
Now, this one just came out. We talked about it multiple times, including this episode. Twisters from 20 from this year,
Yep.
and it is the sequel to Twister, which came out in 1996.
27 years.
Tron Legacy came out in 2010, 28 years after the original Tron movie in 1982.
Yeah.
Your very favorite, Top Gun Maverick, which came out in
Definitely.
2022, 34 years after the original Top Gun, 1986. Another movie that I know you enjoy, Blade Runner 2049, came out in 2017, 35 years after Blade Runner from 82. So then we get to Beetlejuice, which came out this year, 36 years after the original Beetlejuice in 1988. But
Yep.
the really interesting one, now I don't even know if you've ever seen this. Did you ever see the movie Return to Oz in 1985?
I have not.
Came out 46 years after the original Wizard of Oz, which came out in
Yeah,
39.
46 years. And like, I might even acknowledge, just for conversation's sake, if you look at something like Star Wars The Force Awakens is like a direct sequel to Return of the Jedi. Yes, we had the prequels in between, but realistically, when you're talking about a sequel,
Mm-hmm.
you're talking 1983 to like 2015. Now, I won't include The Force Awakens on this list because they actually did continue, where I
Yeah.
think these ones, we got a sequel and then nothing.
Yeah.
Like they didn't make any more of them.
Yeah.
They just sort of made them. And like we know with Top Gun Maverick, we might get another one. It's,
Mm-hmm.
but who knows? They talked
We're
about doing
supposed to
this
get
one.
another Tron potentially, but yeah, right?
So it's interesting because I think another one that they just did again, if you're just going based on the last movie to when they made the newest one, was Beverly Hills Cop.
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
did one of those, which again works. But you're seeing when you read these movies off and you look at them like Independence Day, Resurgence, Wall Street, Money Never Sleeps. Um, even you mentioned Return to Oz. Some of these they didn't really work. They're obviously drawing name power from people's love for the original movie, but they often run into that sequelitis, which is like, why did you make this? And they appear to be made strictly for money,
Mm-hmm.
right? You're like, oh, it looks like the studio was trying to cash in. They probably needed a quick buck, get everybody excited about Independence Day, and then you go see it and you're like, wow, this was terrible.
Yeah.
Not good. And then you get movies on the other side, like Top Gun Maverick, Blade Runner 2049, even Beetlejuice, and even, or, even to an extent, Beverly Hills Cop. I'd say Beetlejuice, and Beverly Hills Cop fall into that middle category of like, was it a masterpiece? No, it wasn't. Was it awesome? No, it wasn't. But was it fun? Yeah. Like,
Yeah.
if you love the
Yeah.
original, you're gonna have a good time. Like, it's cool. I
Yeah.
had fun watching it, but no, it's not great, and
Yeah.
that's probably the end. And then you have like that top line. I think Twisters would fall in with that too. Beetlejuice, and Beverly Hills. Like, was it good? Yeah. If you like the original, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Twisters works. Masterpiece, yeah.
Yeah.
And then you got like Tron Legacy and Top Gun Maverick, where you're like, incredible. and they were both like stunningly beautiful. They're literally updates to the original material that like elevate what made the originals so freaking incredible.
Yeah, right.
You're like, oh my God, Top Gun is so awesome. But like, it's a relic of its time. It only had aerial shots that you could do in the 80s. And you're like, but what if you could do it now?
Yeah.
And then they do it now, and you're like, it is so cool. Or even Tron, or not Tron Legacy, but Blade Runner 2049.
Yeah.
Again, you watch Blade Runner, and Blade Runner is such an inspiration. Sort of the broken down future, Asian economies have taken over. You see this across so much science fiction, particularly video games. You also see it in a lot of anime. You can see where Blade Runner influenced a lot of anime,
Yeah.
and just incredible. But you also wonder too, watching it, like, what would it look like if you made Blade Runner today? Like,
Yeah.
it could be really cool. And then they make it, and it's freaking incredible.
And it has top end special effects. And you're like, wow, this is something really special.
So here's my thoughts on this whole thing, which is sequels that were made 30 years later. I feel like generally it's worth doing. And my reasoning is that I think these movies, if you were to just rank them, will look like a pyramid. You're probably going to get a lot of crappy ones at the bottom, but you're going to get some cool ones. And at the top, you're actually going to get some movies totally worth bringing back. And if we only get a couple of them, I think it's totally worth doing.
I mean, I think that's probably fair. Now, so there is one really interesting thing that I want to bring up as the final point of this discussion.
Let's hear it.
Joseph Kosinski,
Okay.
the director of Top Gun Maverick, also the director of Tron Legacy, and
Wow.
has a writing credit on Twister. So apparently, the true secret sauce is if you are going to revive a film with a sequel, 20 something years later, he's the man to call.
Well, okay. I just ranted for a little while. What are your thoughts on some of these movies? Tron Legacy. I mean, you love it?
Well, I wasn't a huge fan of the first Tron. I think what's great
What?
about Tron, I mean,
What do you like from the 80s? It seems like you hate it all.
I hate everything. You know that. I think what's great about Tron Legacy is it pushes the limit. Like obviously the first Tron movie was groundbreaking for visual effects, but for those of us who grew up, you know, a decade, 2 decades after it, we're like, it looks super dated. And so it was great seeing something with the true power of modern computing and visual imagery behind it, and it looks really spectacular. They had Daft Punk
Excellent
come in and
score.
make an awesome
Yeah.
visual, or a musical score to it, right? So that's great. I think that the thing is, what's weird is I don't think anyone was ever asking for any of these sequels to be made, right? When we look at this list, I think every one of these movies are a movie that someone says, hey, this movie's coming out. Did we need it? But I think I think that probably one of the big factors that determines if it's a success or not is who's involved, right?
Yeah.
If it's a movie where they're bringing back, original people from the beginning, whether it's actors or creators, I think it has a much better chance at being a success than when you say, "Hey, we're going to do an Independence Day movie, but we're not going to put Will Smith in it." Right?
Yeah. I get it. I think, another thing too with a lot of these movies that we have to acknowledge as well is that these are sequels that also acknowledge that time gap.
True. That's a good point.
They most of these don't pick up right after the sequel that they're claiming, uh,
Yeah.
sequelitis from.
It's 23 years after Gordon Gekko gets out of prison, right? That's
Yeah,
where
and
we're
so
picking up.
I do think that also lends itself to the success of the movies that did work because it allows for either a modern interpretation or them to examine the character based on whatever's happened in that time gap. And so I do think that helps, um,
Yeah.
because we're coming into that age of like digital de-aging and
Yeah.
sort of like digital avatars. We saw it with like Indiana Jones and like, hey, we can get Harrison Ford back in there, and uh do this scene where he looks like young Indiana Jones. And you're like, yeah, but
Doesn't work.
I don't think that's what people want per se. So I think acknowledging the time gap is probably the right thing to do.
Yeah, no, I agree.
So, but dude, I mean, to end the episode, like if I had to rank these, I'm probably going, you know, Top Gun Maverick in the one, Blade Runner in the two, Twisters in the three, Tron in the four, then like Beetlejuice. And then below that, you just have like Beverly Hills Cop, and then you start going to like Wall Street, Independence Day, that type stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'm sure we're probably close to the same on that.
I mean, we know Top Gun Maverick's at the top, and that's really the important thing.
I mean, it's appropriately titled to be number one.
Yeah, right.
So, yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think more often than not, these sequels that were made 30 years later, like I'm looking at this list, and CP, you can correct me if you think I'm wrong. I honestly think they're worth it. I think they were good.
Well,
Good to great for the
I
most part.
I
And then we
think the
got
question
some
is
garbage, but
this. I think the question is this. How are we measuring it? Were they successful in the box office? For the most part, yes.
and
Were
I
they
actually
true continuations of the original story? I think it's kind of a toss up.
I like it. I mean, this list to me is genuinely good. Like I'm kind of down. So, let's get another female Ghostbusters, you know? I'm still shocked that you hate that movie, or even that everybody hated it. I didn't hate it.
Okay, let me go back to a statement I made like 5 minutes ago. I hate everything, so I'm not shocked at all.
I don't know. I mean, maybe I'm in the minority here, but I think if you just remove your sort of lens around like why do they need to make the Ghostbusters female and just like get past that. No, again, is it as good as the original? Of course not. But like, was it kind of a fun sequel with like a modern day take on Ghostbusters? I actually kind of enjoyed it. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I come back to the why are you telling this story? And I don't think that there's anything new that we're exploring that wasn't explored in the first two Ghostbusters films by the time we got to Ghostbuster Answer the Call.
Well,
Like
and that's why it was
Ghostbusters
still
Afterlife and Ghostbuster and Frozen Empire did take the story in a different direction, right? They're like, what if your family's fighting ghosts and stuff like that? That's a
well,
different story.
Afterlife and Frozen Empire, I will acknowledge they are sequels that fit in here and acknowledge the time gap.
Mm-hmm.
The female Ghostbusters doesn't. It's more of a reboot than it
Mm-hmm.
is like a sequel. So maybe that wasn't the best example, but I did enjoy it I'd put it on. It's cool. Probably better with a couple beers.
All right. Well,
But
listeners, tell us what your thoughts. What do you think about these 30-year-ish sequels to an original movie that we, for the most part, weren't asking for? What do you think? What ones did you like? What ones did you hate? What's your opinion? Let us know.
and do you think I should do a punishment? If you do, let me know
Yes.
what it should be.
We should.
And yeah, we'll get that going. But be sure to continue the conversation. Ivor, thank you so much as always. You always have like the most in-depth, fun comments that you always get me thinking about things like the TVA. I was like, shit, I never really thought about that. So I always love when you guys continue the conversation. So be sure to leave us comments and follow the show at filmmakerscompass.com. You can find all of our social media links as well as a feed of all of the episodes there. And you can follow the show directly at Film Comp Podcast or Film Comp Pod, and me personally at Big Kid D-Man, CP.
You can follow me at NDCal5. Thanks for hanging out and talking movies with us. We'll see you back here next week. Until then, keep watching movies.